Tenants in Ontario can face a rent increase above the provincial cap for a few reasons, including after the landlord conducts significant renovations or adds some security measures. However, it can also happen before any work is carried out.
If the landlord and the tenant can agree to an increase in rent that's above the guideline, then they can use what's called an N10 form to increase the rent, and that takes the place of the normal rent increase.
Lee Webb from the Canadian Centre for Housing Rights explains that with an N10 form, there's no need to apply to the Landlord and Tenant Board to increase the rent above the current guideline of 2.5%.
The N10 form says that the rent is going to increase by a certain amount. That amount can be up to the guideline plus 3%, and it's for either some new service that's being added to the tenancy or for capital work that the landlord plans to do in the near future.
When applying for an above-guideline increase after work has been completed, landlords can ask for a total 9% hike that's spread out over 3 years. But in this case, the total increase cannot be more than 3% over and above the 2.5% cap. So a tenant could be looking at a cumulative 5.5% increase. If the landlord does not make any improvements or follow through on the reasons for the increase,
in that case, and within the following 2 years after that agreement, the tenant can bring what's called a T4 application to the Landlord and Tenant Board, saying basically that this N10 had been entered into, this agreement had been entered into, and the work hadn't been done or the service hadn't been provided, and asking the Landlord and Tenant Board to reset the rent to what it had been previously or what it would have been had the above guideline rent increase not been applied.
Along with resetting the rent, tenants could also be eligible for a rent abatement.
Let's say that you sign this N10 and your rent goes up in January. In that case, if you don't get the service until July, you could still maybe bring a T4 application to get a rent abatement for the first 6 months of that period.
In such cases, Webb says the tenant will usually only get back the 3% that was above the guideline.
And so they will still have to pay the part that was the guideline increase, but they won't have to pay the part that is above the guideline, at least until the point that the landlord hasn't provided or has provided that service.
Webb says when thinking of filing a T4, tenants should consider whether the delays in providing the service are reasonable or perhaps outside the landlord's control. They should also make sure that they have all the necessary evidence to prove that the landlord failed to complete the work for which the extra rent increase was charged. For more on that, you can go to our website citynews.ca. Dilshad Burman, City News.